This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Welcome to Sussex Library and to this morning's seminar. My name is Castrillo and I am the new head of Special Collections and Engagement at Sussex Library. I'd like to start my introductory remarks by thanking my colleague BRASA and Anna from King's College in London for organising this event and for bringing together such a diverse range of speakers and delegates. It is through good partnership and collaboration that individuals and organizations can achieve their aims. This event is very much testament to that principle. And it is happening at a time where Sussex Library is embarking on an ambitious program of renewal to open up the collections and to share our professional and intellectual expertise with our traditional user groups, but also with other communities of interest which will benefit from our unique and distinctive collections of archives, rare books, and manuscripts. We want to work collaboratively with academic and non-academic partners, and in doing so, ensure that our collections keep growing and remain relevant in the 21st century. The special collections at Sussex Library have been assembled through a long period of time. A significant amount of our holdings are of national and international significance for the arts, humanities, and social sciences. They are a rich record of human activity in a wide range of disciplines, locations, and periods. And certainly, one of the most interesting features of the special collections here is the fact that they are also in a very wide range of European languages, including Spanish and Portuguese. This brings me to the main theme of today's seminar and to the Latin American Pamphlets collection. Having worked with modern political archives for 9 years at the National Library of Scotland, I appreciate the enormous value and significance of ephemeral material in the archive. In many ways, pamphlets, flyers, and similar objects might be considered value, hence the use of the word ephemeral. However, the value of the ephemeral lies precisely in its fragility and the fact that it was not conceived to last. As yet, archivists will preserve this material permanently because it affords a unique insight into how propaganda works, how public opinion is shaped at a particular moment in time, and how the political message is put across to the combination of words and images. What is outstanding about the Latin American Pamphlet collection is the wide geographical and thematic coverage of the material, as well as the presence of items which were produced with very limited technological and financial means. This lends this collection a unique and distinctive value and makes it a resource worth exploring and sharing. Today's seminar is certainly an opportunity to engage with the collection through the eyes and the words of the researchers who will present the result of their work. I'm sure today will provide a platform for sharing ideas, and I'd like to invite you to do that during the day, but also to come back to keep exploring what the library as a whole has to offer. I think there's been a change in the program in terms that there was going to be someone presenting the speakers, but I think that person hasn't arrived, so Julio has asked me whether I can do that. So what I'm going to do before I do that, I'm just going to give you very, very brief housekeeping guidelines. One of them is that we are not expecting a fire alarm test today, so if you hear the fire alarm, just simply leave through the door and we will guide you through the fire escape. Leave everything behind, don't come with stuff, just simply leave everything behind and we will take you as you please. The other thing I want to say is that if you need to leave the room at some point because you need to use the facilities or because you need to go and make a phone call outside, be very aware that you have to go through the special collections reading room. That's a quiet area, so keep the noise to a minimum. And please don't get carried through any glasses with water, any cups of tea or any food, because all the materials that are being used there are very rare, very fragile. We have to make sure that they are not damaged in any way. So those are the only two final remarks I wanted to make before the proceedings start. I really hope you enjoyed the day, and very many thanks for coming today to Sussex Library. Our first speaker is Pereira. Hello, we have met. So, yeah. Anthony Pereira is professor and director of the Brazilian Institute of King's College London. He obtained his BA from Sussex University in 1982 and his MA and PhD degrees from Harvard University in 1986 and 1991 respectively. Professor Pereira has recently published articles in Third World Quarterly, Latin American Perspective, and the Bulletin of Latin American Research. He's currently working on a book about the Brazilian state. He's also president of the Brazilian Studies Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll move over here just to, not that I have any slides to show, but, and I wanted to thank the organizers of this event. Julio was, and Grimaldi were very generous and invited me to see the collections, and I had a chance to look through, especially Brazil material. And, but I haven't been back, and it's very exciting, very interesting, but I thought what I would do is really just have a few reflections on archival research more generally. And then I know some of the presenters will talk about this particular collection. I started doing archival work in the late 1980s. And my first really serious work in an archive was the Archival de Pernambuco archive, reading newspapers, including Última Hora, that were simply, that hadn't been digitized, that hadn't been microfilmed, that were just lying in the tropical air and sort of slowly disintegrating. I've often wondered what happened to those newspapers. So recently I was in the Pusey Library looking at the papers of Samuel Huntington, an archive that actually I got in there before it had actually opened, but sort of a few days before. And I hope to be doing some archival research next year if I'm on sabbatical. But so I just want to reflect on that. And I think the biggest change in that period of time when I've been able to do archival work is this. The fact that you can reproduce, that you can copy images so quickly and easily now with a smartphone or with a flatbed scanner or whatever you have, has really made archival research much more. It's just changed the game, because in that first bit of archival research when I was in the Archival Study of Pernambuco, I brought in index cards and I sat with the newspaper next to me and I took notes on what I was reading, and that's how it was done in those days. So we really have all kinds of new possibilities now. But what I wanted to mention is, I just wanted to raise 4 points in which I think the archival researcher is a bit like a private detective, a bit like a PI. And when I'm thinking of a detective, I'm thinking of someone like Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, or Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep. Those guys are very well known because they were both played by Humphrey Bogart in the movies. But there may be some other detective, more recent detective, that you think of when you think of detective, and I invite you to think about those people. But so let me make the first point about the private detective in these kinds of depictions is that they're freelancers. And I think that's something very important about archival research. You may be doing the research with an affiliation to a university, but you don't have to speak for that university. You don't, thankfully, universities are not yet corporations with a particular line on academic research, and you don't have to be a spokesperson for anybody but yourself. And I think that's going to generate a certain amount of mistrust. I recently went to the archive of the Army, and the Army was quite happy to give me access to their archive, but they wanted me to sit through an hour PowerPoint presentation about the Army's role in national life. That's fine. But I think they wanted me to make sure that I knew what they thought about the Army. Not being fully trusted is okay. It doesn't mean, as a freelancer, that you don't have to follow the rules. I just recently saw a very silly film with Emma Thompson, in which an archival researcher just steals the stuff that he's looking at. He just pockets it because he's in competition with other academics, and he thinks this is how I'm going to publish that cutting-edge article. And I just thought, is that what Hollywood thinks archival researchers do? I mean, that's appalling. But it was presented there as perfectly natural, and the person who did it was the hero of the movie. So you shouldn't break the rules, but you don't have to follow the line. And I think you find this in this fiction that I'm talking about. If you look at Dashiell Hammett, for example, Sam Spade operates in a world in which most big organizations are corrupt and they can't be trusted. And I think this came out of Hammond's experience as an operative for the Pinkertons. He worked at the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and he was involved in strike breaking in Butte, Montana, which the Pinkertons were accused of killing the union leaders, one of the union leaders. And I think he was deeply ashamed of his involvement in this strike breaking activity in Butte. And so his fictional characters, Spade is part of a two-man sort of detective agency, but he wants them to be freelance, I think, because he wants to show that the world is not what it seems, that large organizations spin the truth in order to promote their own interests, and the private eye has to sort of navigate between those conflicting narratives. I think the second point about archival research, and this is again similar to these private eyes, you're freelance, but someone's got to pay for your research, usually. I mean, there are some of us who are lucky, who are independently wealthy, who can just go in and do archival research without anyone paying for it, but most of us need to find someone to pay for it, whether it's the university or the ASRC or whoever. And I think, again, this shouldn't determine what your conclusions are going to be. You're still freelance in that respect, and you have to negotiate that issue of who pays and what the restrictions are in terms of the sort of any conditionality on payment. I think the third issue is perhaps more important, and that is that for Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe and for most archival researchers, there's a lot that you still don't know, even though that you're looking at these documents. And how you deal with this uncertainty is very, very important. There's a sort of need for skepticism, there's a need for caution. What isn't in the archive, for one thing? What are you not seeing, and how does that relate to the total universe of documents that might be out there? And then this struck me when I looked at some of the materials that Julio and Ana showed me. Who produced the documents? Who might have read the documents at the time that they were produced? Some of these things, for example, I worked in the DOPS archive, the Political Police Archives in Sao Paulo after they'd been opened in 1995, and there was widespread suspicion that these archives had been cleaned because they had been in the hands of the federal police for a long time before they had been made public. And so that there were incriminating evidence about some of the former members of the police Federal that had probably been removed. So, and you have to sort of think about things while you're working through this material. There's usually, as in a good detective story, there are usually stories that don't match. There are different angles. It's good to triangulate. I mean, for some of this material, I'm not sure if it's true, but you might be able to find people who were alive at the time of production, so you can triangulate by interviewing people. A colleague I used to have at the New School, Janet Abulugo, used to say that the dilemma of writing up research based on archives is sort of you have to write the least untrue thing that you can write. And that's a very sort of cautious and sort of negative way of putting it, but I liked that skepticism inherent in what she said. And you usually need to connect some dots. It's very rare, I think, in archival research that you pose a research question and you go into the archive and you find a smoking gun. You find that metaphor, again, sort of evokes the detectives, but you find something that's so irrefutable and so direct that you really can kind of stop your research at that point and just present it as an artifact. One of these writers that I'm mentioning, Raymond Chandler, he said something interesting about his own fiction, which I think can apply to archival research. He said, the ideal mystery was one you would read even if the end was missing. In other words, it's so good, you're not really reading it just to find out who done it. You're reading it because it's inherently interesting, and the characters and the settings are sort of interesting. And I think that's true about good archival research. You've got a good research question, which is overhanging the whole thing, and is driving you forward. But it's not just about answering that question, it's about how you're answering the question. And that, I think, is about partly inhabiting the world of the people that you're doing research on. Chandler wrote something else about Dashiell Hammett. He said, Hamlet wrote for people with a sharp, aggressive attitude to life. They were not afraid of the seamy side of things. They lived there. When violence did not dismay them, it was right down their street. Hamlet gave murder back to the kind of people that committed for reasons, not just to provide a corpse. He put these people down on paper as they were, and he made them talk and think in the language they customarily used for these purposes. And I think that, in some ways, is what an archival researcher is trying to do as well. He or she is trying to give voice to the people represented in the documents that are there. And I think that is a legitimate, I know social science has taken a very quantitative turn, it's taken a very sort of positivistic turn, but I would still defend that giving voice is a legitimate purpose, can be one of the purposes of social scientific research based on archives, and that requires some of this sensitivity that Chandler was talking about when he was talking about what he liked about Dashiell Hammett's fiction. And again, that's partly about imagination, that's partly about joining up the dots, and that's sort of having the passion to want to reproduce those voices. I think E.P. Thompson has a great line about, rescuing people from the condescension of posterity, of sort of understanding what people were trying to do within the terms of their own lives, and trying to make that clear, even when it doesn't look easy to understand from the vantage point of the present. There's a very sort of presentist bias in the life of social science that it doesn't really reflect the point of views and understandings of today. It's of no value. And I think archival research can get us away from that presentist bias. The last point I wanted to make about the parallels between Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe and the archival researchers is that they may have been freelancers, but they had a lot of support. They had a lot of contacts and a lot of support. So Spade, because he worked for a big national detective agency, could go to those people. He'd go to the police. He had contacts in the morgue and so on. And the archival researcher, I think, begins with a good research library. And we're really lucky in London that we've got such excellent libraries, and this one among them. And I think for the student, the librarian can really guide them and sort of get them to put the archive that they're working in perspective. And we've got the British Library, we've got LSE, UCL, and the Vaughan Library. We're really blessed here in London with that. And so, again, very general observations that I'm making here, but I do hope that people can make use of this particular archive, take the plunge, take risks, give them help, and become a good detective. Thank you.